All right, so welcome back to the Fast Casual Nation podcast, and today we're going to be talking about better for you and is it better for your profits? And one of the things we're going to explore on the podcast that you don't necessarily see on our show is exploration of things like ingredients as well as alternative ways to do things for both your restaurant business and maybe for those of you who are listening at home. So I've got a guest with me today, Carmel Hagen, who is the founder and CEO of Supernatural. And Supernatural is a company that we've followed for a while, and I want to kind of just jump into it. Carmel, if you could kind of give us a little bit of a backgrounder on Supernatural.
Sure, I'd love to. And Paul, I'm so happy to be here. Um, so Supernatural is really the result of, like 3 decades of sort of messing around before I got to Supernatural.
Right.
When I was very small, I was really into baking. I was in a Pillsbury Bake Off when I was 10. I was obsessed with all things sweet and creative. I faked being sick for 2 weeks once so I could just stay home and watch the Food Network. But I did not jump right into food. I didn't think of it really as a career. I went instead into tech startups, spent about a decade there. And after that, I said, there's way too much tech in the world. What can I go do that makes me feel like I'm really contributing in the way that I want to with my work? And that was going back into food. So that was kind of like the very early seed. My professional background at that point was a little bit of cooking from when I was a kid,
Right.
and a lot of branding and marketing and product from when I was in tech. So I had a lot of learning to do. And I started with it was a big jump. I'm making it sound like I just got out of tech and started a food company. It was a little more painful than that. But I started with a coconut sugar company, got my sea legs, and because baking was really my passion, I knew I needed to build a company in that particular aisle.
Mm-hmm.
And where we really needed to innovate still was in the decorative space, in food colors and in decorations, in many more things than that. And so that's where we started to develop Supernatural.
Right. So if you look at, the fast casual space, one of the things that really kind of separates them from the rest of the pack is usually it's their menu creativity, not only in the
Yeah.
staple items, but also in their desserts. So obviously you get, whether you're a Panera Bread or you are a company like Sprinkles, or, you could be a fast casual operator that really focuses in and zeroes in on these kinds of elements, especially around the ingredients. And all of this is really kind of focusing down on, I guess, are all of your products plant-based from the get-go?
They are. And that word plant-based it means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So when I say plant-based, I'm specifically referring to our colors. Technically, of course, you can say that sugar is plant-based, and the other ingredients in our products, they are also like very clean and technically originate from plants.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, we are plant-based, but I really like to think of the actual plant source in our product is really the colors.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So let's talk about kind of the evolution of the consumer mindset, because clean. There's a lot of buzzwords that get thrown around. Over the past few years,
Hmm.
especially whether I kind of started with farm fresh, then it went to organic, then we went to clean, then we're now on this what I think
Right.
somewhat is a fad on plant based. Now that the consumer speak is kind of accepting of this, what are your thoughts on if consumers are ready to actually step up and pay the piper for those additional quality products?
Right. So that is a multifaceted question with, I think, a lot of multifaceted answers. It's difficult to speak about consumers in a broad stroke because they will all pay very different amounts for
Mm-hmm.
different things. There is certainly, as we see in the natural world, natural groceries, the growth for that is not slowing down. Like more
Right.
and more people are willing to pay a premium to have that peace of mind from buying products that are, or at least are perceived to be, better for us with better supply chains, et cetera. In relation to, restaurants, And in particular, this day and age, how sort of what you eat then becomes part of who you are as a person, and whether that's, shareable and something that you're excited enough to want to, broadcast it on social media, as much as we are that person, or, really find that person obnoxious is sort of beside the point. But people are absolutely, it seems these days, willing to trade up for something that reinforces the beliefs and values that they hold for themselves. So, and certainly the limitation there is, income and the accessibility to these things, which is a different topic. But I would say that, in general, most people are willing to pay more for something that is better for them. Their ability to actually have those funds is different, but the desire to, I think, is pretty universal. What would you say?
Well, we've seen a pretty significant amount of growth in the better for you space. So that in itself kind of lends to the fact that there's got to be a consumer set there willing to pay $12 for a smoothie, and it's happening. The question I have, and I think one that a lot of operators and even consumers are starting to look at, is we've started to see these lower transaction counts. Last year, we started to see kind of a bit of a nudge in the market, and then this year, the transaction counts really were starting to get impacted, and we were seeing, this hitting some of the best brands in the industry, including a lot of better for you brands. So, I think the baseline would agree with you, is that there is a baseline there of consumers that are willing to pay. The question is that a critical mass, in the U.S. or worldwide, that can be enough to support the growth? That could be the scenario, is that the growth transition and I guess to a certain extent, kind of that mainly where we've just got so many of these healthy halo or better for you brands now, that have we reached a critical mass there? So maybe that is where the balance is there is an audience out there for it. Maybe it's fairly big, maybe it's 5-10% of the market space, or maybe it's 30. But the question is where is that balance, I think, right now? Because it appears that we're starting to see some pushback, from, the consumer. The consumer is starting to reduce their occasions, and they're starting to push back on these price points. So I'm really interested to see how this is going to play out, especially over 2020, as we kind of go to this next phase in restaurant growth, because that's been something that is of contention, I think, with a lot of pundits right now, is whether or not the industry will grow for
Right.
2020.
And I think that is also so fascinating because while occasions might be decreasing somewhat, we know that people ultimately are still eating the same number of calories a day, right?
Sure.
Like that's not going anywhere.
Yeah, they're just shifting it. Yeah.
Exactly. Like so often when you look at the ways that markets are changing, it's very easy to react to be like, okay, so in my particular vertical, it seems like something's going down or something's going up. But really at the larger, grander scale, people are still getting that somewhere. And as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as someone that's a problem solver, really it's the goal there is to understand, okay, what's happening to that? And it's very interesting because in food, we know that people aren't eating any less. It's just a question of where, okay, if they're not eating here, where are they eating, and how do I follow that?
Yep.
That's such a meaty question.
Well, I think
not to make fun on plant-based.
Exactly. Yeah, they are. It's clear they are shifting to alternatives, and there's been kind of a lot of study being done on whether the consumer mindset, especially in the millennials, are moving toward more grocery, which I think back to your earlier point of, kind of these specialty markets which have higher quality. And Whole Foods is kind of the poster child of that. But there's been some recent movements with other grocery chains that have really significantly hit the market with companies like Aldi and obviously Trader Joe's, both of which market their products at a much lower rate. So are we seeing, because this is kind of the, I did an interview with a book author of Burn the Ice a little while back on another show I do called Barron Report. And his whole theory and of the book was that the restaurant industry had hit its highest, and that we were going to see some pretty significant fall off. With that happening, when all of this plays into, I think, products like what you guys do, is with that happening, fall off in the restaurant industry. Sure, that's going to push the occasions over to grocery and cooking at home, looking for better ingredients, but also starting to push back on those price points. So I think that's the thing that I still
Huh.
am going to be analyzing pretty heavily. And plant-based
Right.
is a fairly expensive, proposition for whether it's you're doing it
It
yourself.
is. It is.
I went to a restaurant today for lunch, and it's a plant-based restaurant. I had no animal protein, and for two people it was $38, and that's just, to me, for lunch. I thought, wow, this just can't make sense for the average
Mm-hmm.
American. So I'm really concerned about how that's going to play out over the next few
Right.
decades or years. All right, so let's talk. So I guess my question to you is, do you think it's here to stay? Do you think plant-based is here to stay, where we're going to see real societal shifts?
No buzzword is here to stay.
Right.
And agree with you that plant based is a buzzword. Do I think that, this, what we've felt over the last, maybe even decade is sort of a rebellion against the 1950s sort of packaged food
Right.
frenzy. And the current incarnation of that, of course, is plant-based. And yes, there's also like a whole like sort of diet trend wrapped up in there that's
Sure.
like a little bit hard to parse out. But I do think that as the accessibility to fresh produce, the consumption of fresh produce, what we now know about the way that eating fresh produce can, the health benefits of that are for all of us versus eating a more packaged diet. I think that all of the symptoms are there for this to be something that is ongoing in whatever buzzword
Mm-hmm.
connotation it may take. Now,
Right.
like you mentioned, it is so much more expensive. And shopping the outside of a grocery store or going to the restaurant that's, all organic, like there is a major trade up for that. And
Sure.
that is where these food deserts and other really discomforting markers of like inequality sort of pop up around food.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot to work on there, but I do think it's a very noble effort and something that I think that we need to do on more like a societal level to make sure that everybody has equal and affordable access to the healthiest foods for them. So I hope so.
Yeah, well, I've got a guy coming on soon to talk about that very topic, is dealing with the food deserts that we are facing, because there is now almost a separation of classes when it comes to food, especially
Mhm.
around organic, plant-based, and et cetera. Whatever buzzword you want to put on it, even fake meat today is being looked at as, it's more expensive, but it's usually found in, other than if you go to maybe the Impossible Burger and what they're doing with the QSR chains, because they've been able to, kind of get that product down. But even then, I think I'm not necessarily sold on whether or not that product is truly a different track in terms of healthy. Maybe it's healthy in terms of
Mhm.
not red meat, but
Right.
is it really good for me in prolonged, exposure if I'm eating 10 of those
Absolutely.
burgers a month, kind of thing. All right, so let's look at a couple of other topics here. So when you look at ingredients here,
Mhm.
ingredients, you guys are obviously kind of the king of that approach toward moving in this direction of providing better products and better ingredients out there. If a restaurant chain came to you and said, "Hey, listen, we're really interested in changing out our entire dessert line or our sweets, and we want your help," and the direction that you guys would give someone like that, how would you go about that? And I guess the question would be is, what kind of desserts and trends would you try to go toward? I looked at a lot of your recipes, and many of them
Uh-huh.
are really fun, and they're great for kids and things like that. I'm just kind of curious how you would approach that if it was a restaurant business.
Sure. So I like to, if I'm talking to anybody in the restaurant or just the wholesale industry in general, I don't really like to keep them within the confines of supernatural products.
Mhm.
Just so you know, I'm going to be approaching like the answer to this from a little bit of a broader perspective. But I think that there's a few reasons why it's great for restaurants to be exploring changes like this, particularly at the level of like, artificial colors.
Right.
Um, Dessert programs are, sometimes people go really big on dessert programs. Sometimes they go not so big. It's like not really the primary focus. But when you do a dessert program, right, it can actually become something that really, if you do
Exactly.
something innovative or, super Instagrammable, it can make or break your restaurant.
Hmm.
So, what I love about switching over to a cleaner ingredient profile there is that number one, when you look at Nielsen's data, artificial colors are among the top 5 ingredients that all Americans avoid. Like when you talk about just what people want to not have in their food anymore, artificial colors is one of those things. So it becomes something that isn't just, like a good for you, better for you approach, but this is also something that a lot of restaurants, if they make a change like this, they use it as part of their marketing message because it's really
Right.
powerful and it does speak to something that a lot of people want. Secondarily, it is really fun playing with superfood ingredients that also have colored attributes.
Sure.
My food colors actually, they're not superfood ingredients. Like what a superfood color ingredient would be something like a, pink pitaya that maybe is bringing some antioxidants to the table while it's also giving you like a nice hot pink shade. Our colors are really, they're natural sources that are hyper concentrated. Like you're
Hmm.
using our colors just to get the colors. But if I was a pastry chef, and I had the opportunity to work with pink pitaya and make something neon pink that's, also full of superfoods that's going to break the internet because it's so beautiful.
Right.
That's a really cool recipe for doing something that is not just a great dessert item, but also something that's going to be a buzz maker. So I love that as well.
I like the because you're right. When you look at maybe whether it's restaurants or fast casual concepts, anyone really that is implementing something around the dessert category, it really does benefit them if they're doing. I've seen, because we've seen everything from the craze of the cronut all the way to the guy up in New York that does the rainbow bagels. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and those were, national notoriety type points for those restaurants. But if you could get this into a concept where they've got the opportunity to really kind of implement this system wide in the way of their entire dessert. There's a little chain here in Florida called Offer Dolls, and they're mostly a sandwich and soup shop, but they really feature their bagels, their cookies, their muffins, and things like that. They would be a perfect example of just revamping that entire offering and going at it from either one, a more visual standpoint, but two, would be something a little bit more healthy and potentially a plant-based approach, which I think would be huge for something like a brand like them. They could easily do it. All right,
Absolutely.
so if you looked at the industry today, whether it's food, consumer consumption around whether it's food away from home or food at home, meal prep, et cetera, anything that's catching your eye or you're watching really closely in terms of trends going into the next few years.
Yeah. So what we really watch very closely is really what's happening on the creative side of desserts.
Okay.
Our primary, like our primary focus is still B2C. We're selling through grocery stores, we're selling through Amazon. And what we really love seeing right now is how much of the world, particularly kids, are getting driven to the kitchen because they want to be creative. And a lot
Yeah.
of this is coming from, like shows like Nailed It. It's coming from Instagram, it's coming from Pinterest. And kids and people aren't just, they're not just really interested in just making a cake anymore. Like they're very interested in like, how do they decorate it? How do they
Hmm.
express themselves creatively on top of that?
Yep.
And that's actually where we're seeing all the growth coming from. Like when you look at a baking aisle, it's kind of flattered down. Like cake mixes aren't really going anywhere. A lot of things in there, they're not really going anywhere. And then you get over to the decorative segment and it's growing a lot, like
Yeah.
anywhere from 3 to 10% a year, depending on the product. So we love that. And it's all happening because people are creating these beautiful things. And no matter what, like no matter what trend you're riding, no matter what diet you're eating, if you make something that is sort of captivating and imaginative, people respond. It's just kind of like the human condition to be creative and respond to it. So we love how that also translates over in just if you're a pastry chef that's feeding people inside of restaurants, or if you're, making a rainbow smoothie that you're selling at your juice bar, it kind of this visual culture around food that's gotten so magnified over the past couple of years is something that, we are in love with and we don't see it going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I think, you're right. Social media has played a massive role in that, obviously, just especially when you look at the Instagram craze and really where the visual aids are going, which I think is going to continue to put pressure on both restaurant brands as well as household brands to try to bring these kind of products home and kind of into the mainstream for consumers. So very cool. Well, Carmel, it's been great talking to you today. I love what you guys are doing there in the sense of kind of repositioning a whole sector around that. And I think as we look at the restaurant industry, we're going to start seeing more and more companies start to flock in this direction. So you might be onto something really cool.
I hope so. Yeah. And thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah. All right. So for all of you listening in right here on Fast Casual Nation, the podcast, you can, of course, subscribe on iTunes or on Apple Podcasts, if depending on which app you use. Also catch us on Spotify. Make sure and leave a comment and give us a rating, because that's really kind of one of the ways that we get feedback from our listeners and viewers. It's a great thing because it does give me ideas for the show. And if you do have somebody that you think should be on the show, make sure and send us a note to producer@foodabletv.com. This is Fast Casual Nation, the podcast. We'll catch you next time.